All right, I've been wanting to do this series of videos like this for a while. This has nothing to do with diet, nothing to do with health and fitness. Uh, I figured I wanted to have an opportunity just to share some things on a much deeper, I guess, mind illuminating level. And this isn't going to be for everybody, but I'm just going to warn you, that's what I plan on doing for the next few videos that I post. Just because I get tired of talking about the weather, about sports. Those are just filler conversations that don't really have much impact. But these different subjects that I like to talk about sometimes tend to either freak people out, or they kind of disassociate and get sidetracked. And so I just figured I had to kind of put these thoughts and ideas just somewhere out there in the ether, just for just consumption purposes. But this first subject I think is fascinating because it comes about in many different conversations, and a lot of people just can't really grasp the full understanding of this subject. And for example, my wife, the doctor that she works for, he always recommends that when people drink water, he always asks them this, what kind of water do you drink? The reason being is because some bottled water has fluoride in it. And if you drink too much fluoride, fluoride's good for your teeth, because you brush your teeth, you spit it out, but you don't swallow it. But when you start drinking fluoridated water, it calcifies your pineal gland. A lot of people kind of shake their head and say, okay, well, what's the pineal gland? Well, first off, if you were to drill a hole between your eyes and you go back to about the center of your head, it's located right there. Your brain is encompassing the pineal gland. That's why it's called the seat of the soul. It's not part of the brain. It doesn't do any of the thinking processes. It has nothing to do with the amygdala or hippocampus or prefrontal cortex, all that stuff. I can't remember all the parts of the brain. But anyways, I looked in my wife's anatomy and physiology book from nursing school, and it says that it makes melatonin and other neurochemicals, but not much is known about this. Well, a lot of different philosophies and religions actually have known about this for a long time, even thousands of years. If you look on some Egyptian hieroglyphs, you'll see some of their deities, Osiris, Horus, Ra, all of them. They'll be holding a pine cone, because the pineal gland is shaped similar to a pine cone. And this is represented in a lot of artwork. Even the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incans, they would have pictures depicting a pine cone. I also find it fascinating that on Christmas we put a pine tree, with pine cones on it, in your living room. I'll do Christmas is going to be the next one. This is kind of like a warm up. Also, if you go to the Vatican in Rome, the capital of the Catholic Church, at the very center of the Vatican there is a fountain, and on the top of that fountain is a pine cone. It's a weird coincidence. But also, this is represented by the all-seeing eye. One of the reasons being is because the pineal gland has some of the same organs similar to that of your eyes. It's got rods and cones and retinal tissue, and has some of the fluid that's in your eyes is also there in your pineal gland. It's weird. That's why it's called the mind's eye. It's called the third eye, and the seat of the soul. This is also represented in sacred geometry with the Vesica Pisces. It's the all-seeing eye shape, which also, if you draw the tail out, following the circle on the Vesica Pisces, this is going to be another one for another day. That's where you get the Jesus fish. You ask people, well, why do you have that Jesus fish on your car? Most of them couldn't tell you. They say, well, it's because of the fishes and loaves thing. Not true. The reason being is because the Vesica Pisces, the angle, the arc, is basically the square root of 3, which the closest numerical ratio is 265 over 153. And if you look in John chapter 11, when the apostles have been fishing all day, and Jesus says, well, cast your nets over on this side. And they say, well, they've been casting fish all day. You couldn't catch anything all day. Well, they throw the nets over, they pull in a whole bunch of fish, and it says that it was 153 fish. Weird coincidence, huh? But what's fascinating about the pineal gland is there's also a chemical that gets released at very distinct times in a person's life. I've read that it happens when you're born. It also happens when you have lucid dreaming. and also when your body's in the throes of death, near-death experiences. I mean, you ever have like a lucid dream, you wake up from it, and sometimes the thought of it quickly fades away, or other times you hold on to it and you try to explain it to somebody, but you sound like a crazy person because it just makes no sense. You just don't have any frame of reference to be able to describe what you saw. Well, that's something called dimethyltryptamine that is flooding your brain while you have lucid dreams. And this also happens when your body's in the throes of death. I've read a bunch of books on people that have had near-death experiences, and you hear them talk about how they've met God or seen loved ones or angels or intelligent entities. They have like this crazy story to tell. Now, that's when dimethyltryptamine is flooding your brain in the throes of death. But some people could chalk it up saying, well, this is just a chemical hallucinatory experience, because dimethyltryptamine is the most potent hallucinogenic chemical on the planet. And it's endogenously made in your own body. Your own body makes it. But I don't think it's necessarily just a hallucination, because something that we don't realize when you think about your eyesight, what your eyes are seeing is a very slim spectrum of what we call visible light. Visible light is electromagnetic energy. That's waves of energy. Now, a specific frequency is what we call visible light. If the frequency gets higher, you get into ultraviolet light, X-rays, gamma rays, which are completely invisible to us. If the frequency gets lower, you get into infrared light, microwaves, radio waves, which are also invisible to us. So there's this big spectrum of things that are invisible to us that we can't see. And so I kind of feel like when this process is taking place, it's not that you're seeing things that aren't really there. I kind of tend to think that maybe you're seeing things that have been there the whole time, you just haven't had the capability to see it. That maybe like your brain's like a big radio antenna, and that it kind of maybe adjusts the frequency a little bit, because that's what your eyes are doing. It reads, the photons of energy go through your eyes, your rods, cones, your retina. It hits your optic nerve, and then your brain tells you what you're seeing. Excuse me, sorry, didn't mean to burp. But then, so then I think about that. If people are having these near-death experiences and people don't doubt what they're seeing, well, maybe this is also true during your dreams, that maybe you're not hallucinating these things, that these things are somehow on a weird level getting communicated to you, you just don't understand it. I mean, think about how much of the Bible was written from people having dreams, I do make a lot of biblical references just because that's sort of what my background had come from, and I know a lot of you are that's like a good frame of reference. There's some really interesting correlations that I found in here. But you think about how much of the Bible has been written from dreams or interpretations of dreams that different prophets and people have had. But also, okay, this chemical, dimethyltryptamine, it's found all over the place. All kinds of organic life contains it. But the reason that you don't, some of the food that you're eating probably has small trace amounts in it. But the reason that you're not hallucinating all the time is because it gets broken down in your stomach by something called monoamine oxidase. So it never makes it up to your brain. But some of our neighbors to the south, in South America, some of the shamanic tribes, have found a way around this. They'll actually take Bansterius capi, it's a vine, which is very rich in dimethyltryptamine, and they'll make a brew out of it called ayahuasca. They'll make the brew with something called chacruna leaves, which is another plant that has a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So think of all the thousands and thousands of plants in the rainforest, and they've managed to find these two separate plants, mix them together, and they make something called ayahuasca. Now, people that have been to South America and they've had these ayahuasca experiences, they claim some of the same things that people that have had near-death experiences claim. That they've spoken to loved ones that have passed away, seen intelligent entities or angels, or they've actually spoken with or they've met with God. They've met God. It's fascinating, and these people come back from these experiences. It's helped cure clinically resistant depression. It's helped with addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's it's amazing, hearing some of the stories from this. But also, since it has the MAOI inhibitor, the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, ayahuasca will make you throw up. You'll puke like crazy. And the whole experience lasts about 1 to 2 hours. Now, kind of as a caveat, if you start looking into this and you want to go to South America and try it, don't do it if you're taking a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or on your antidepressants, an SSRI antidepressant, because it'll counteract with the MAOI and it can be fatal. So I've got to say that. But also, other people have found ways of just extracting it in just a powder form that gets vaporized without the MAOI inhibitor. And that experience lasts about 10 minutes. Now, what I found is interesting is one of the plants that gets used is something called acacia. It's one of the most rich plants in dimethyltryptamine anywhere on the planet. Incidentally enough, some Hebrew scholars believe that the burning bush that Moses talked to was an acacia tree. Also, if you find this fascinating, the Ark of the Covenant, that gold box that they found in Indiana Jones, which was the kept in the Holy of Holies. It was a wooden box made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, and that's what they put the 10 Commandments and Aaron, who was Moses' brother, his staff in there, and some of the manna from heaven was kept in this gold box. And this was like the holiest, most sacred object in all of Hebrew literature. So I kind of find that as an interesting coincidence, don't you? But then also, I was thinking about with near-death experiences as well, how that could kind of tie into religious history. And I was thinking about this when I was watching a baptismal ceremony, and they dunk people underwater, and parents are there to clap and all that stuff. But I wonder if the meaning behind that's been lost a little bit too, because I was watching a hardcore history podcast from Dan Carlin. And when he was talking about the history of the early church, when it moved up into where it clashed with the Vikings, there was a Viking leader that had his family get baptized, and one of their sons drowned. So I realized a lot of the language that gets used in baptismal ceremonies has to do a lot with life and death, dying to self, being raised to new life. And so I couldn't help but wonder, hearing that story about the Vikings, and then also watching Game of Thrones, when the Greyjoys, how they, as their induction ceremony, they practically drown the person in the water. I wonder if maybe in those early days, if baptism, if maybe, this is just me, my own thought wandering, I wonder if maybe they actually might have drowned someone, brought them close to drowning, so they have that dimethyltryptamine experience, near-death experience, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we've seen what's on the other side, not worried about death anymore, so then they can go and live more boldly. Just a thought. But I mean, it's not out of the ordinary, because think about in New Guinea, there's a tribe of natives down there that tie vines around their ankles and they jump off a tower to try to get as close to the ground as possible. That's where bungee jumping originated. You might have a near-death experience with that. Or the Matwa tribe, I think they're in South America also. They have a wicker glove that is covered in bullet ants. And bullet ants are the most painful biting insect on the planet. They call it a bullet ant because one bite is like being shot with a bullet. They'll put a whole glove, wicker glove, covered in these things, and they'll have to do a coming of age ceremony with this wicker glove on their hand, which again could bring up a near-death experience. Your body would go into shock thinking that it's dying. Also, the tribes that use ayahuasca. There's tribes in Cambodia that use something called iboga, which is a similar effect, but it lasts for 24 hours, which incidentally enough gets used at drug treatment facilities around the world, and rehab centers that use iboga have like a 87% success rate when treating people with heroin and opioid addictions, which incidentally in the United States it's only about 25% because we don't use iboga because we're just closed-minded, I guess. And you look at other cultures too around the world. In ancient Greece, they had something called the Eleusinian Mysteries. Not a lot's known about this, but they say that you weren't considered a human until you'd experienced the Eleusinian mysteries. Philosophers like Plato and Socrates had went, great leaders and Caesars and philosophers and mathematicians of back of the Greek age went to these Eleusinian mysteries. So anyways, that's just my wandering thoughts. I've been wanting to put this to film for a little bit just so it's documented and you can watch it, think about it. But I guess the next one I'm going to do is a breakdown of Christmas. Some things that you probably didn't know about Christmas. You know, get, I don't know, anyways. So you guys have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.